What's going on? This is Ryan with Automatic Comics, and up next we're going to talk about what's going on in the comic market right now, the trends I'm seeing, as well as some recent high and low sales. Stay tuned. Alright, before we get started, please remember to hit that like button and hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. Like I've mentioned in a couple of my other videos this week, I was on vacation a week ago, so I didn't do a market video last week. I just didn't have time, but I still recorded the data for that, so I have all that pricing data for that week. I don't have a gap in my data or anything for the heritage auctions, so I'm going to talk about that this week as well. So these last 2 weeks have been a little bit of a Jekyll and Hyde with the heritage sales. 2 weeks ago, there had been some signs of weakness, which I think I can explain and I will talk about a little bit later. And this last week was actually pretty strong. And so with that, we've really been seeing mixed signals from the comic market for about the last month. I've been reporting on this for quite a few weeks now, and about the last 4 to 5 weeks, I've been seeing mixed signals with the comic prices. And to me, this all really points to a place where the market is kind of fighting at that top, and it's starting to level off, pulling back a little bit for many of the really early mover, high spiking books. We are still seeing some new highs for books that hadn't really moved quite as much, but we're definitely starting to see kind of that back and forth each week, a little more of a leveling off, and like I said, a little bit of a pullback in a lot of prices. Now, a quick recap: if you haven't caught one of these videos before, this is your first time watching this, thanks for starting to watch the channel, and I hope I provide some information that's useful. And what I do is every week I watch the Heritage Weekly Comic Auction, and I identify anywhere from usually around 160 to 200 key issues, and this is across all ages, modern, gold, silver, bronze, as well as different publishers and genres, everything like that. And I estimate the prices that I think those books will sell for. I also capture the prior high sale for that book in that grade. Then I look at the realized price after the auction and make conclusions from that. See how strong the market is, weak the market is, look at different trends that I'm seeing with different titles, that kind of thing. So now let's get into that sales data, what's going on in the market. And the sales from 2 weeks ago were definitely down, but I think there were a couple reasons that could have caused that. The first was that was the week of the Promise Collection and the Heritage Signature Auction. And so there was a lot of money being spent on those books that week. And so it could just be that there was a little less money to spend on the weekly comic auction. And so prices just maybe went a little bit lower. Now, the other thing was that this was the first week that Heritage split the comic sales to 2 days. I didn't even know they were planning to do this. It wasn't until I started actually watching the auction that I was like, man, this thing ended a lot earlier than I was expecting it to. And the reason was that they had cut it off about halfway through. So on Sunday, they got through about half the books, maybe 500 or 600 of the books. And then on Monday, they finished it off, going through the remainder 400 or so books. Now, this is actually something, if you've watched some of my prior videos, I wonder if there's somebody from Heritage maybe that watches my videos, because I had been talking about this, that I thought this was maybe a reason that they were getting lower sales on the latter part of the auction, because these auctions kept getting bigger and bigger. They used to be somewhere around 300 to 500 books per auction. So they'd end, around 11 o'clock at night, Eastern time. But the last month or two, these auctions have been getting huge, getting up into 700, 800, 900 books, and they've started breaching 1,000 books. So they were ending at 1, 2 in the morning Eastern time, and so I guarantee you they were missing out on a lot of potential bidders and resulting in lower prices later on in the auction. So what they decided to do last week, it seems, is they split the auction in half, and they did half the books on Sunday and then half the books on Monday. And if other people were like me, I didn't know that was happening. And so it may have caught some people off guard, and then they weren't watching the second half of the auction on Monday. And so they may have had some lower sales that week. And then the next week, so that the current week, people knew about it, and sales seemed to increase again. So there could be a couple things that didn't have the Promise Collection sale that week, It was also, I think, that maybe people are now aware that the sales are being split between Sunday and Monday. So here's the chart that I put together since I've started doing this. I'm 10 weeks in now. I started back in April. The latest date I have is for June 27th for that auction. And on this chart, I've got 4 lines. And 3 of the lines really tell me what's going on week to week. So if I see those as strong numbers week after week after week, that tells me that we're seeing building strength in the comic market. If I see them getting weaker week after week, it tells me I'm seeing weakness building in the market. And right now, like I said, we've been seeing this jumping back and forth for the last 4 or 5 weeks. And that happened again these last 2 weeks. You can see a week ago we had a drop down in basically all of the numbers. The dark blue line on the top, that tells me what percentage of the books sold above my estimate, above the price I estimated. And then the other 2 important lines for week to week are the green and the purple line. The green line tells me what percentage of books went 20% or more above my estimate, and the purple line is what percentage of books went 20% or more below my estimate. So the really big outliers, the big movers above and below. And you can see, like I said, a week ago it was a big downtrend. But then the last week, it snapped right back up again. I saw really good numbers this last week. 58% of the books selling above my estimate, with 32% selling 20% or more above my estimate, and only 16% selling 20% or less. And so those are really strong numbers. And then for the first time in 4 weeks, I saw 51% of the books selling at new highs again. So over 50% of those books selling at new highs. So I think we really are starting to see a leveling off in the market after a recent downtrend. Now, we will have to keep watching this. This is something that I've seen as well and I've commented on when I'm pricing books. I've really noticed a drop of anywhere from about 10 to 30% from the peaks that we were seeing in May. But I have started seeing a little bit of strength building again in some of those books that had been weaker. So I'm going to talk about that now because I'm going to talk about the trends that I'm actually seeing in the comic market today. So the last few weeks I've been talking about a few similar titles and what I've been seeing with trends in those titles. And the first one that I always like to talk about because it's just the most popular title across the board, and that's Amazing Spider-Man. And 2 weeks ago, I saw 10 books that went above my estimate, 3 that were 20% or more, only 5 that went below my estimate, and only 1 that was 20% or more below. Now this week, there was a ton of Amazing Spider-Man that went for sale. I saw 17 books that went above my estimate, 3 that were 20% or more, and 18 that went below, just 1 that was 20% or more below. And so we are really seeing a leveling off and even a little bit of strength last week in Amazing Spider-Man. And this week it was a little more mixed, but I haven't seen anything like the big weakness that I saw in Spider-Man about a month ago. Now, the next title that I've been looking at is Fantastic Four. 2 weeks ago, just 3 went above my estimate, 1 more than 20%, and 10 went below my estimate, with 3 going 20% or more below. Now this week, saw 11 that went above my estimate, with 7 20% or more, and 6 that went below my estimate, with 2 20% or more below that. So really weak a couple weeks ago for Fantastic Four, but back to some pretty good strength this week. But again, this is just showing these last 4 weeks it's gone back and forth with Fantastic Four. And so I think it's kind of a microcosm of what we've been seeing in the market, that it's really trying to make up its mind what it wants to do, which tells me we're really kind of at that leveling off point. We aren't seeing just constant high sales every week, week after week. Now the other one that I've been talking about every week is X-Men. And 2 weeks ago, there were 7 books that went above my estimate, 3 more than 20%, and 10 that went below my estimate, with 5 more than 20% below. But this week, I actually saw 9 that went above my estimate and 9 that went below. And this is the first time in, I think, over a month that I've seen actually the same number of books within X-Men going above and below. So maybe that's telling us that we're starting to see an end to that downtrend, because X-Men was one of the titles that started moving really early compared to all the other books. And so I think it peaked earlier as well and started dropping. And so I think we're maybe starting to see that drop level off. and even start to see some stronger sales again in that title. So X-Men is definitely one to watch. If you've been looking to pick up books in that, you may want to try picking those up now, because we might be starting to see an uptrend in X-Men. Now, I didn't see a lot of other trends this week other than with Amazing Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, and X-Men. One, though, that I have seen consistently the last few weeks has been the strength in the Golden Age, especially pre-code horror, as well as some in romance books, specifically with Matt Baker. So if you're not familiar with Matt Baker, he is a famous cover artist from the Golden Age. He's known for drawing a lot of good girl art type covers, but also romance covers, and they can be worth a lot of money. And I've seen some really strong sales with his books. And so I'm not really sure what this means, but it does seem that there's a renewed interest in the Golden Age. I don't know if this is a lot of these new collectors that were getting into comics are now finding the Golden Age books, maybe starting to get into those, finding some interest in them, seeing how rare they are and how difficult they are to find. That could be it. But I have definitely seen strength in these areas, especially pre-code horror. Pre-code horror has been really, really popular recently. All right, now let's get into the high and low sales. I love talking about these because it's just always fun seeing the books that really go outside of what I was expecting them to do. And I'm going to start with a low sale, and this was Amazing Spider-Man #2 in a CGC 5.5 that sold for $3,600. Now, that sounds like a lot of money, but for this book, that was not. Now, this is the first appearance of the Vulture, and this was an old label book, which those usually command a premium, and it also was a really nice looking copy. You can see on there the reds are really deep with this book, which sometimes is kind of like an orange color, so this one looks really nice. Still sold for well below what I was expecting. I was thinking this book was going to sell for about $5,200, and this went 30% below that estimate. And while this book doesn't sell all that often in these grades, the prior high was $4,500 back in February, and we've seen prices just go crazy in a lot of Spider-Man books since then. A 5.0, for example, sold on May 4th for $5,000, and a 7.0 sold for $6,595 on June 14th. So to me, this was really an outlier of the sale. Kind of wish I would have maybe picked this one up. I think I did throw a bid in on this one, but I ended up not going after it any further. But this is just a great book, and I think that was just a steal for that book right now. Now, this is a really expensive book in all grades. Even a 0.5 has sold for $1,500. And so if you're looking for alternatives, I think a great one is issue #7. I've mentioned that book before. It's still in the first 10 issues of Spider-Man, and it's his second appearance, and it's much cheaper. A 5.0 sold for $690 on June 30th, and a 2.5 sold for just $330 on May 31st. So that's a book that you can get into for just a few $100, and like I said, still in the first 10 issues of Spider-Man, his second appearance, so I think that is a great option, given that Amazing Spider-Man #2 is probably out of a lot of people's price ranges. Now, this second one was a crazy high sale. This is a Golden Age book, All American Comics #25, a CGC 4.5, sold for $11,400. This is a book from 1941, and it's the first appearance of Dr. Midnight. It's also just a very early Green Lantern book. His first appearance is in issue 16 of this title, so this is 9 issues or so later. Now, I had estimated the price of this book at $3,000, so this was 280% above that estimate. And I feel like that estimate was reasonable. The prior high was $1,434, but that was all the way back in 2009. But a 5.0 had sold for $3,700 in September of 2019. A 5.5 sold for even less, $3,400 in September of 2020. And a 1.8 had sold for $1,027 in January of this year. So I think this was a pretty reasonable price estimate for this book, and there must have been a couple people that really wanted it, because it just kept going and going. And there wasn't anything particularly special about this copy. It wasn't white pages, it wasn't a pedigree, so there's not anything that would have really been a reason to think that it would sell for so much more. It is a rare book, so with only 23 blue labels on the census, there just must have been the right combination of bidders there, and both of them really wanted that book. Now, if you're a fan of Golden Age Green Lantern, there are a lot of options out there that you can get into for a few $100. You can look in this title, there's also Green Lantern's solo title from the Golden Age. If you go into the lower grades, you can definitely get into those books for a few hundred. You don't have to spend thousands of dollars for them. So it's definitely something to look for, because he does appear in quite a few books, quite a few titles early on. All right, the next one is Avengers number 16 in a CGC 8.0 that sold for $408. Now, this was a really low sale. This is the first appearance of the new Avengers team, so that includes Scarlet Witch, Hawkeye, and Quicksilver. It's also got the classic Captain America Avengers Assemble cover, and it was also a white pages copy, so a bunch going for this book. Now, I don't normally talk about books that I buy. I usually like to save those for the unboxing videos, but this is actually one of the books that I picked up in this auction, and I had estimated the price at $700, so this was 40% below my estimate, so I felt like I had to buy this book. It's also just it is a beautiful book, really looking at it, and I really like the purple covers as well. I've had a copy of this book in the past. It was like a 6.5 or a 7, something like that, but this one looks much, much nicer. Now, the funny thing with this one is that there was also a 5.5 that was for sale in this auction, and it sold right afterwards. And that one sold for $312, and it went 20% over my estimate for that book of about $250. So it's just kind of strange when you see one book sell for well below the estimate, one sell for way above, and it's the exact same book sold just seconds apart from one another. But I mean, that's why I watch a lot of books. I was happy to get that deal on that book. Now, for alternatives, I wouldn't really go for any alternatives with this book. It is very affordable, especially in the lower grades. It can be found for $100 to $200. A 4.0 sold for $152 on June 21st. You could also get this book raw for even less. So if you really want this book, I wouldn't go for any alternatives. Now, for the next high sale, I'm going to give you a twofer for this one, and this is for Matt Baker. And this was Cinderella Love 15 in a CGC 4.5 that sold for $1,560, and Cinderella Love 29, which was a raw graded at 4.0 that sold for $2,760. And I like talking about some of these more rare books, these more obscure books, because I think it's good to be aware that these books hold this much value. So if you happen to come across one, you know to pick it up. And I really think this is the kind of book that you could come across in an antique shop or something like that, and somebody wouldn't really necessarily know what it is or what it's worth, and you could maybe find it for cheap. Now, like I said, these are both Matt Baker romance books. I talked about them a little bit in the intro and how they've really started to see a big resurgence in popularity. Now, these are very rare. They're difficult to price. They don't sell very often just because there aren't a lot of copies out there. And I had estimated the price of the issue 15 at $700, so this was 120% above my estimate. Now, there are no prior high sales in this grade, but a 3.5 sold for $528 in July of last year, and a 5.0 sold for $700 in 2017, so this was a really big jump for this book. Now, for the issue 29, I had estimated at just $600, so this was 360% above my estimate. And so, this was just a really, really strong number. Now, there hadn't been a sale since 2014. And that was a 5.0 that sold for $403. So, I don't know if somebody needed this to finish their run of Cinderella Love or what, but this was a massive sale for that book, especially since it wasn't even graded. This was a raw book. Now, it really shows you how much value there can be in these books. And sometimes I found it almost seems random which ones sell for these big prices. You can have multiple books in that run, all done by Matt Baker. One of them will sell for $2,000 in a grade. The number right next to it with a very similar cover, everything else sells for $400 in that grade. So it can be difficult to really know the prices on them, but they are all valuable. They do all have a lot of value, especially with the Matt Baker covers. Now, for alternatives, there are a lot of different titles that he did covers for, so you just kind of have to look through them, find ones that might be interesting to you. You don't necessarily have to pay thousands of dollars for them. Like I said, you can get them for a few $100 as well. A couple of the other titles you might look for are Diary Secrets and Teenage Romances, but he did lots of other issues as well, so definitely something that you can look out for and try to find some of these books that he did the cover art for. All right, now this next low sale, I wish I would have picked this one up, but I didn't. I may have bid on this one too, but I just ended up passing on the next bid. But this is a classic L.B. Cole cover. This is Blue Bolt number 114 in a CGC 4.5 that sold for $1,380. Now again, that seems like a lot of money, but for this book it isn't. I had estimated the price at $1,800, so this was 23% below my estimate. The prior high was $1,995 in February of last year, but I had been seeing this book and some other grades sitting on eBay for a while without selling, so it just didn't really seem like there was as much demand for this book right now. But regardless, in 2017, this book sold for $375. So that shows how big the resurgence in popularity in artists like L.B. Cole have gotten, because that's a jump of about 250% in 4 years at this lower price. Now, there was another sale of this book this week, just about a day ago, and it was a big sale, so it made me feel even worse about not picking this one up, but you know, it is what it is. Now, L.B. Cole covers, if you want to get into purchasing L.B. Cole covers, he did a lot of covers. I've talked about him as well in the past because I really like picking up L.B. Cole books, and the cover content is really what drives the value of them. The pre-code horror books tend to command a lot more money, but you can still find some pre-code horror books that he's done for relatively affordable prices, a few $100s, not necessarily into the thousands. But there was also, for example, the Promise Collection book, Mask Number 1. That's one of his most famous covers. It sold for over $100,000. I think it was 108. So they can also be very expensive. But there's a lot of variety. There are pre-code horror books, there are romance books, there are cartoon character type books. So there's a lot out there that you can look for if you're interested in picking up books by L.B. Cole. All right, now this was a big high sale. This is Fantastic Four number 4 in a CGC 5.0 that sold for $9,600. And this is the first appearance of Submariner in the Silver Age, and with the recent unconfirmed rumor that he's going to be the villain in the next Black Panther movie, no idea if that's true or not, but it has definitely been driving up these prices. It's brought up this price as well as books like Submariner number 1. Now, I had estimated the price of this book at $7,000, and this was 37% above my estimate, just a huge jump. And that $7,000 estimate came from the prior high sale that was just on May 10th, so very recently. So this is up a lot in a very short amount of time. This book was also just selling for about $3,000 as recently as November of last year. So it's up over 200% in 7 months. So it's a big move for an FF book as well as just a book that's already this expensive. Now, if you can find this book at a discount or maybe the prices it was going for about a month ago, I would recommend picking it up, but it is a rare book. It is tough to come by, and they just tend to be expensive. So that's probably unlikely, but there are good alternatives for Submariner. For example, Submariner number 1, which is just a great cover. Love that book, but it's gone up quite a bit as well recently, along with Iron Man number 1. So another option is the book Iron Man and Submariner number 1. It's not as popular because it's just a one-shot instead of a book that started a continuous run of books. But anybody that's selling it will always tell you, oh, it came before Iron Man 1 and Submariner 1, so it's a better book. But it's not as popular. It doesn't sell for as much, but it is still a cool cover. It is worth picking up. And it is much more affordable than especially Fantastic Four number 4, but also Iron Man 1 and Submariner number 1. The 4.5 sold for $325 on June 17th, so you can get mid-grade, low-grade copies for a few $100s. Now this next one, this was a low sale that was a little bit surprising as well. This is Marvel Premiere number 15 in a CGC 9.4 that sold for $1,381. This is the first appearance of Iron Fist, and it's been on a big tear recently. The prices of this book have really been spiking since there have been rumors about a new show with Iron Fist and Luke Cage. And I had estimated the price of this book at $1,700. This was 19% below that estimate. The high sale for this book was $1,800, but there had also been a $1,525 sale on June 9th, so it's been on a little bit of a downtrend recently. But a year ago, this was just a $500 to a $550 book, so it is still up significantly from that time at even $1,381. Now, I think this is a great first appearance cover. I really like this book, and even if people are kind of sour on it a little bit from the Netflix show. I think if he does really come back with the MCU and they do that character again, I think it's going to be a new, really popular character. I wouldn't necessarily try to go for alternatives for this book. If you can get a copy of this book in lower grade, you don't have to pay thousands of dollars. Again, it's going to cost you a few $100, but I would always recommend going for the first appearance. But there are some alternatives. You could go for Marvel Premiere 16, which is his second appearance, or Iron Fist #1. My personal preference would be Iron Fist #1 over Marvel Premiere 16. I like issue #1s more, the start of new runs, more than second appearances, but that's just me. If you have one that you like more than the other, they are both much more affordable than Marvel Premiere #15. Now, back to DC for an awesome high sale. This was Green Lantern #76 in a rare high grade, a CGC 9.4 that sold for $6,900. This is a record in this grade. One of my favorite covers of all time. It's just an incredible Neil Adams cover. It's also one of the comics that's considered to be the start of the Bronze Age, and just because I like this book so much, I was happy to see it go for a new record. I had estimated the price of this book at $5,500. This was 25% above that estimate. And the prior high was $5,600, and that was just from a couple weeks ago on June 19th. So it's a big jump in just a couple weeks. And a year ago, this was about a $3,500 book. So it's about doubled since then, which is a pretty big jump for a DC book, also one that's this expensive. Now, this may be because of the hype around the upcoming HBO Green Lantern Corps show, or it may be just people realizing that it's an awesome cover and this book just kind of getting pulled up with the rest of the market. I don't know, but really great sale for this book. And this is a rare book in this grade. There are only 44 9.4s, and this is a Bronze Age book. This is a pretty recent book. 23 9.6s and only 2 9.8s, so rare book in high grade. Now, I have a raw copy that I think is about an 8 or an 8.5 that I need to send in for grading. Used to have an 8.0, and I sold it because I thought my raw copy looked nicer, but we'll see. I've got my fingers crossed for when I send that one in. Now, there isn't really an alternative for this book because you're buying it a lot for the cover and for the significance of being the first book of the Bronze Age. So I wouldn't go for another book, but you can get this book relatively affordably in lower grades. A 2.0, for example, sold for $195 on June 20th, and it was a nice presenting 2.0. And so you can still get a nice presenting lower grade copy of this book for $200 to $300. All right, I got 2 books left. This is back to a low sale. This is Strange Tales #110 and a CGC 4.5 that sold for $4,560. And to me, this is a perfect example of a book that's dropping when it's not getting any real news, but the instant we get any type of news on the next Doctor Strange movie, Multiverse of Madness, especially since Loki is going on right now and it's supposed to tie into that movie, I see this book exploding the instant we get anything like that, get a trailer. It's a big book too. It has a lot of first appearances. First appearance of Doctor Strange, first appearance of the Ancient One, first appearance of Wong, first appearance of the Nightmare. Now the big thing that holds it back is the cover is not great. None of those characters are on the cover. Instead, you've got the Human Torch and Paste Pot Pete. And so that really hurts this book. If Doctor Strange was on this cover, I think it would be worth significantly more. Now, I had estimated the price of this book at $5,800, and so this was 21% below that estimate. The high sale was $5,500 on June 24th, about a week ago, but I think this was just a steal for this book. Whoever got this book, congratulations, because I think you really got it for a great price. Because there had also been some big sales of $5,400 on June 17th for a 4.0 and $5,200 on June 16th also for a 4.0. And so this is a 4.5. That's why I priced it at $5,800. Now, this book is up a lot in the last 12 months. A year ago, it was selling for between $1,600 and $2,000. So it is up around 150 to 200% at these numbers of about $4,500 to $5,500. So it's not like it's unexpected to see a little bit of a pullback, but still, I think this book has more room on it. It is a relatively rare book, especially once you're getting out of the really low grades. So again, I thought this was a great purchase. Now for alternatives, his first appearance is really pretty expensive. You're almost always going to be spending over $1,000 for any grade. But his second appearance is much more affordable, and that just comes one issue later. That's Strange Tales number 111, and it cost about 10 times less. A 2.5 sold on May 10th for $204. A 4.5 sold for $449 on April 17th. So if you can get that book for a few $100s in the lower grades, I think that's a good purchase. It's also got the first appearance of Asbestos Man, he's right on the cover, so it has some positives with it too, with one of those campy C-list villains. Alright, now to the last book, and I wanted to end with a pre-code horror book because I've been talking about how strong the pre-code horror sales have been. This is Witch's Tales number 25 and a CGC 6.5 that sold for $4,080. Now, this is from Harvey Publications, and there are a number of pre-code horror books from Harvey in 1954 that are just brutal popular covers. This is one of them. And I had estimated the price of this book at $3,200. This is 27% above my estimate. Prior high was $3,800 all the way back in May of 2018, but it had actually been kind of on a downtrend over the last few years. Had a low of $2,800 in March of last year, followed by a $3,120 sale in November of last year. So with the recent resurgence in popularity of these pre-code books, it came back up, set a new high. And this is a tough book to come by. There are only 58 graded copies on the census, and this 6.5 is in the top third, so this is a really nice presenting copy. Now for alternatives for this book, the Witch's Tales run is actually a pretty long run for a horror title. There are 28 issues in that run, and so they have all kinds of different levels of gore and horror, whatever you're looking for. Some aren't as expensive as this. There are definitely more affordable books, so I'd recommend just going on to whatever site it might be, Go Collect, Cover Price, something like that, looking at the different issues and the covers and which ones might interest you, and then start looking for those. Now, Harvey, I think something that was interesting with Harvey is that they did a lot of these really gory covers that have been very popular for pre-code collectors in that last year, basically, before the Comic Code Authority was put in place. Now, a couple examples of those, if you haven't seen these before, I'm going to pop the pictures up of those as well. They did Black Cat number 50, which is this melting face radiation cover, which one of the most in-demand pre-code horror books out there. Another one has a very similar look is Tomb of Terror number 15. It has this guy with an exploding face. It actually had a massive sale this week too. I think it was like a 4 or 4.5 sold for $7,200. So those books are very expensive as well, really in demand. But lots of options. If you're into pre-code horror books, you're looking for books like that. All right, so that's all the books I'm going to talk about this week. For the market, like I said, things seem to be kind of fighting the top right now. I've seen a lot of back and forth, a little bit of pullback, but I am starting to see some of these books seem to put in a floor. Like X-Men really seems like maybe it's starting to turn around from the downtrend that it's been on. But I don't see anything that really points to some imminent huge drop. I'm seeing pullbacks in the 10 to 30%, but with most books being up 150, 200, 300%, it's really not that big of a deal. But a lot of those pullbacks that I've been seeing have been in some of the really hot keys, things like Giant Size X-Men 1, Hulk 181, X-Men 1. So if you've been looking to pick up copies of those books, now might be the time to do it before you actually get an announcement from Marvel that the X-Men are really coming or Wolverine is really coming, because then I think there's going to be almost no end in sight to seeing the prices of those books keep going up. So just something to consider if you've been looking for those types of books, that I am seeing a little bit of weakness and maybe leveling off in those, so it might be the time to look for them. So thanks for watching. If you'd like to see some more videos, I've got videos over here that you can click on. If you enjoyed this, I'd appreciate if you'd subscribe. I've got my subscription button right down here, so just click on that, and I will see you in the next video.